In this video, we'll talk about getting your sources information from Zotero into Rome. The process for this requires a little bit of setup, but after that, using it is going to be a breeze. First, under this video, you'll find a file called Rome Metadata Export, and you download this file. Once it's downloaded, you need to copy it to your Zotero translations folder, translators folder. If you don't know where your Zotero folder is, open Zotero, go to Preferences, Advanced, and look at Data Directory Location. In that folder, you'll find the translators folder. Again, copy the Rome metadata export.js file into this folder, then quit and restart Zotero. Once you've done that, go back to Preferences and head over to Export. There, open the drop-down menu under Default Format and select Rome metadata export and close your preferences. Now, you can select the source in Zotero and click Command-Shift-C on the Mac, and I believe it's Control-Shift-C on Windows or Linux. Switch to Rome and click Command-V. Press Command-V. This will paste all the important metadata from your source into Rome, like this. As you can see, this copies over a link to the paper's Cite key as the page name, the author's year, title, a link to the item within Zotero, as well as fields for topics the source covers and the reading status of the paper, which by default is to read. And finally, you'll see there's an element called citation graph, and we'll cover that in a minute. In my workflow, I usually copy this over to my daily page, and then I shift-click the link to open the page in the sidebar and drag the top block over. That brings along all its child blocks too. All right. Let's take a break. There was a lot of stuff happening, and I want to make sure you know what's going on. First, why are we doing this? Having the metadata of your sources in Rome allows you, over time, to build a really nice graph of references. Who cites who, what topics are covered by which group of researchers, what common terms do they use, and where do their definitions differ. Answering these questions is much easier if you have the metadata already inside your database. And the reason we're using Zotero for getting this metadata into Rome is convenience. Sure, you could type all of this in yourself, but why would you do that if a simple shortcut can get you the same result in a matter of seconds, right? So let's check in on the citation graph thing that also gets added. What is this and why is it useful? It uses an advanced feature in Rome called queries, which allows you to search your whole database. And we haven't covered those yet in detail, but we'll do so later in the course. But luckily, you don't need to be an expert on queries to get a lot out of this. I'll give you a demo. Let's say we have a couple of papers from the same field, right? Here's a couple of books and papers that are relevant to the research I do. And when I copy over quotes from a paper, and we'll cover that in detail in a future video as well, I use the formatting that you can see here. When the quote cites another author, I indent below the quote an attribute called citing. Attributes are also an advanced feature that you don't need to know in detail now. All you need to know is that you create an attribute by following a word with a double colon. After you've created this attribute by writing citing, colon, you follow it with a link to the cited papers page. Do note that this requires you to know the cite key of the source. If you don't have the paper in your Roam yet, and also not in your Zotero, you'll need to do the Google Scholar to Zotero dance to get the metadata from the paper and its cite key. Now, let's say we have 4 or 5 papers all citing a common source. Here's one, and so on. And as you can see, in all of these, I have a quote, and under each quote, I have the citing attribute and a link to the paper that they all cite. Now, if we go to the page of that paper, you see that under the citation graph query, all of these quotes show up. And that means it's now super easy to look at who writes about the main topic of this book, totalitarianism, but you can imagine the same for any given paper. And in that way, you always have the original context of that citation right there. And that's super powerful. And when you indent a comment under the citing block, this also shows up, right? And that makes it quite simple to comment on how some sources are treated in the literature as you read and reference. All right, to summarize, by using the Zotero translator linked under this video, you can easily get your sources metadata into Roam. To install the translator, watch the beginning of this video again. You can then copy the metadata out of Zotero and into Roam with a very simple keyboard shortcut. That's Command-Shift on C, and I believe Control-Shift-C on Windows and Linux, and paste it anywhere in your graph. Then you open the page of that new source in the sidebar by shift-clicking on the link in the top block of the thing you just copied over, and drag the block over. Now all your metadata is in place. With your metadata comes a query that collects all the quotes from other papers that cite this one. All you have to do to make that happen is adding the citing attribute and a link to this paper below the quote. Awesome. Now go forth and use your metadata in Roam. And here's a first action step to get you started. Pick one paper and add the citing attribute with links to the cited sources under the quotes you've extracted. Do that for one paper, a couple of quotes. You don't have to be exhaustive. This isn't meant to be busy work, but pick a couple of quotes, and as always with Roam, this will accumulate over time and be super, super helpful. And with that, we'll conclude this video, and I talk to you in the next one.